You didn't speak, and that silence, it wasn't noble. It was a knife placed gently on the table while she kept swinging words like a child with a broken mirror. You didn't flinch when she accused. You didn't smile when she wept. You simply let her collapse into the vacuum she created, while her reflection begged you to react, to explain, to soften. And in that moment, something grotesque happened. She began to rot, not visibly, but in the space between her next sentence and the realization that you weren't going to fill the silence for her. Something inside her, the performance, the projection, the carefully rehearsed ache, began to unravel. You left no closure because you were never holding the door. You refused to correct her narrative because her lie was the only thing keeping her intact. And now you watch, quiet, still, unapologetic. Not as a strategy, but as instinct, because to dance for affection was never in your bones. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video. Leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the silence. She needs your gaze to exist, and your absence becomes the abyss that devours her illusion. She enters the room, not with footsteps, but with expectancy. Her skin wears questions. Her lips prepare answers to arguments that haven't begun. But there you are, unmovable, unflickering, unneeded, and that, to her, is the deepest insult, because her presence is sculpted not to be but to be seen, not to feel but to provoke feeling. You do not look, you do not engage, you do not offer your face as the mirror she rehearsed in front of. It begins slowly, this disintegration, a smile that hesitates, waiting for response, a glance thrown like a lure, returned with nothing. She fidgets, the way actors do when the audience coughs too loudly. Her performance is unraveling, not because of anything you've said, but because of everything you refuse to say. She is dressed for a war that requires your participation, but you lay down your arms. You don't even stand. You let the air thicken with her effort and let your breath remain silent. You are not withholding, you are absent, and that absence is not passive. It is the removal of the canvas. It is the withdrawal of the stage. It is the moment she realizes that her entire sense of self was draped upon your gaze. And now, without it, she floats faceless, formless, disarmed. She speaks. The words are crisp at first, like glass chimes in wind. "Why are you like this?" she asks. But it isn't a question. It's bait. It's the beginning of a fishing line that hopes you'll tug back, but you don't, because her question doesn't require truth. It requires theater, and you've already left the auditorium. She tries again. "You used to care. I remember when you memory is a mirror too. You realize, not of truth, but of roles." And she is begging you to return to the script, to play the old lines, to tell her who she is again, because she only knows it through the reflections in your pupils. But you don't look, you see, and that is worse. You see through her, through the fluttering, the calculated tremble, the strategically placed pause in her sentence. You see the algorithm of the act. You see the machinery behind the tear, and she knows it, and she hates you for it. She does not love you. She loves what she sees of herself in you. And now that there is no you to reflect her, she cannot find her own shape. You've become a void, and a void is different from absence. Absence is a missing presence, but a void is something more terrifying, a devourer of meaning, a dark mirror where the only thing reflected is what was projected into it. She yells now. The volume rises, the tempo quickens, not because she is angry, but because silence reveals, and she is terrified of being revealed. What is she? Without your correction, without your approval, without your interruption, your justification, your touch, she is noise, echoing in a canyon that no longer responds. There was once a time you believed in her emotion. You responded to it. You softened. You explained. You tried to help her untangle it, believing it was sincere, believing it could be soothed. But sincerity requires risk. And she never risked truth, only used emotion as currency. You've come to know this. The tears were coins, the confusion, a strategy, the vulnerability, an audition. So now you stare into her storm, and it passes through you, like wind through rock. She cannot move what doesn't bend for approval. She cannot hurt what has withdrawn the skin of attachment. She will accuse you now. She must. You're cold. You're cruel. You think you're better than me. But even this is ritual. She says it not to express pain, but to provoke yours. She needs to see you feel, because if you feel, then she exists. Then her tactics still work. Then the mirror still functions. But the mirror is broken, not shattered, worse, dissolved. You are no longer the polished surface she once sculpted her identity against. You are not a man in resistance. You are a man who has vanished from the chessboard. She cannot play against absence. She tries to make herself beautiful again. She recalls something you once said you liked. Her hand brushes that part of her body, as if it still carries value. But it no longer hypnotizes you. Not because she has changed, but because you no longer need the drug. You've woken up inside the illusion and found it dusty, found it mechanical, found it unworthy of a reaction. There is no cruelty in your silence, only clarity. But clarity feels like cruelty to those who survive through manipulation. She was never the villain. She was the victim of her own drama. And now you have taken away her script, her spotlight, her standing ovation. She is naked, not in skin, in identity. She cannot shape herself without your gaze. She cannot blame you if you do not defend. She cannot win if you refuse the game. You sip your drink. You stretch your fingers. You stand not as a threat, but as an ending. The moment you walk out, she doesn't cry. Not yet. First, she stares, as if trying to rebuild herself in the reflection of your back. But your back holds nothing for her. You do not slam the door. You do not raise your voice. You leave the space with the same indifference that creation leaves the ruined, without ceremony, without permission, without goodbye. She collapses later, alone. Not because you hurt her, but because she could no longer find herself in your gaze, because her existence was built on your reaction, and your silence became a mirror she could not survive. And so, you destroyed her not with anger, not with revenge, but by becoming the one thing her manipulation could not conquer, a mirror without a face. Every dramatic plea is built on the assumption that you'll respond. When you don't, the performance turns into panic. She always thought her scream could shape the room. That pain, when pronounced loud enough, would twist the air around her, compel gravity to bend, compel you to kneel. But the moment came when she unleashed it and nothing changed. The walls didn't shake. Your eyes didn't flicker. The void between you absorbed it like snow falling into a black lake. And for the first time, she heard it herself. The hollowness, the theatricality, the strange echo of a performance that had lost its audience. At first, she believes you must be broken, numb, emotionally dead. That must be the answer, because her voice, her weapon, has never failed her. She has cried in boardrooms, thrown things in bedrooms, turned silence into an altar for guilt. But now you just sit there, unmoved, not as a punishment but as a boundary so vast, so ancient, it predates her understanding of control. This was never about the content of her scream. She doesn't want you to understand, she wants you to yield, and when you don't, the scream distorts, grows louder, more frenzied. She begins to panic. Not because she is in pain, but because her power is no longer functioning. She is not confronting you. She is confronting the terrifying possibility that her tactics were never real to begin with. You are no longer a person in her narrative. You've become something more devastating, an unresponsive sky. She weeps now, but even her tears seem misplaced. They fall on the floor like rehearsed rain, missing all thunder. The drama is collapsing because it was never rooted in truth. It depended on choreography, your lines, your defenses, your explanations, and when you don't play your part, the whole production turns surreal, like a play performed in an empty theater under flickering lights. Say something, she finally demands, not from pain, but from fear. The silence is unbearable because it has begun to mirror her, not reflect her beauty, her emotion, her strength, but reflect the absence of all that. Reflect her dependence on your participation. Her entire power was predicated on your resistance. Without resistance, she has no opposition. And without opposition, she has no identity. She isn't angry that you're distant. She's terrified that your silence exposes the machinery, the cue lines, the preset timing. She wanted to provoke rage, or affection, or apology, because those meant her illusion still held you. But you give her nothing, not detachment, not cruelty, just presence without performance. And that kind of presence is fatal to the manipulator. So she throws the next weapon vulnerability. She talks about childhood, trauma, past lovers who hurt her. She hopes you will lean in, that your silence will collapse under the weight of her story. But again you remain, still, respectful, but unmoved, because you've learned not all suffering is sincere. Some pain is wielded like perfume sprayed in the air to mask manipulation. She doesn't understand how you can listen and not respond, but you do, because response implies investment, and you are no longer investing in illusion. You are observing, witnessing, and your witness burns more than any insult ever could. She doubles down. Now it's threats she'll leave, she'll vanish, she'll find someone else. But even these feel like borrowed lines. She is no longer speaking from herself. She is reciting from a dead script. And her voice, once so piercing, begins to tremble under its own emptiness. This is the collapse, not of her body, not of her presence, but of the architecture she used to build control. The scream has no scaffolding now, no ceiling to bounce off. It goes out and gets swallowed. She is not just unheard. She is revealed. And that is the one thing she never prepared for. She paces now, looks to the walls, the floor, the window, anything to escape the eye of your silence. She curses you, then pleads with you. She calls you heartless, then begs you to hold her. Her voice cracks in 13 different directions, trying every spell she's ever known. But none work, because none were designed for truth. Only manipulation. And manipulation cannot survive in the oxygen of stillness. You are not unfeeling. You are not ignoring. You are simply refusing to betray yourself. And to her that is worse than hate. Because hate still dances with her. Hate still speaks her name. But you do not speak it. You do not rise. You do not explain why her tactics fail. You simply let them fail. You are the mirror she cannot shatter, because it does not reflect. It absorbs. She has a moment now brief, but honest. A flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, you are not playing a game. That maybe the scream doesn't work because it never meant anything to you. That your calm is not calculation, but conclusion. That you are not waiting for her to change. You have already left, not physically, but spiritually. You have withdrawn the currency of attention, And that currency was all she ever truly wanted. She doesn't want you to care. She wants you to prove that she still matters, and silence proves nothing. She sits down, not out of peace, but because the stage has melted. Her audience is gone, and now she must sit with herself, not with your judgment, with her own. The scream has collapsed, and underneath it, she hears something worse, her own emptiness. It is a sound she has never listened to before, because it has always been drowned out by your anger, by your explanations, by your emotions. But now, with nothing left to provoke, she begins to hear the hollowness inside her tactics. She weeps again, this time not to manipulate, but because, for the first time, she is alone in her performance. The curtains have fallen, the lights have dimmed, and you were never on stage. You were in the audience, watching, until you realized it wasn't a show worth staying for. And now, she doesn't scream, she whispers, not to you, to herself, because the collapse of the scream is not the end of manipulation. It is the beginning of self-recognition. You do not move. You let her sit in the ashes of her own volume. You let her confront what she has always feared, that without your response she has no script. And without a script, she has no voice. And without a voice, she must finally listen to the silence, to the ruin, to the fact that you are still here not as a savior, but as a mirror that no longer bends to her reflection. In the silence, she is forced to confront her own hunger and discover it was never about you at all. She sits now in the dim room where all her tactics have died. The air feels heavy, not from words, but from the absence of them. Your silence does not press against her, it presses inward into her own chest, her own memories, her own myth. She came to feed, as she always has, not on love, not on connection, but on reaction. And now that you offer none, she is starving. But not for you, for herself. The self she never built. The self she spent years avoiding behind the noise of other people's emotions. Your stillness is no longer interpreted as cruelty. It has become a famine, a mirror that refuses to speak, a field where she cannot harvest validation. She claws at the surface of your silence, hoping to unearth some old softness, some buried anger, some familiar shape. But there is nothing, just the ground, just the echo of her own hunger bouncing back at her. She looks at her hands. They are shaking, not from weakness, from emptiness. These are hands that learned how to plead, how to accuse, how to seduce, how to fake tremble with precision. But they were never used to hold stillness, never taught how to hold truth. She cannot touch you. And worse, she cannot touch herself, not the real self, the one beneath the masks, because there was never a self she wanted to face, only a self she wanted others to maintain for her. You gave her that once, briefly. You tried, you offered depth, listening, patience, and each time, she devoured your energy as proof of her worth. She mistook your empathy for fuel, and like any glutton who's never been hungry for truth, she fed until you thinned into exhaustion, until you stopped feeding her altogether. Now, you've become the famine she always feared, not because you're cruel, but because you've become immune. You've seen through the ritual, and you no longer serve it. She tries, even now, to recover the magic. She shifts her tone, she softens her face. She tells you she understands. But there's a pause in her breath where you hear the hunger, not for healing, for reaction. Still, even now, she is trying to elicit something, a sigh, a twitch, a flicker in your eyes, something to prove she still exists in your world. But you offer her nothing. And now, the most terrifying thing begins. She turns inward, Not because she wants to, but because she has no choice. Your silence has stripped away the audience. The theater is gone. There is no stage left to scream from. So she descends into herself, not dramatically, not beautifully, but clumsily, like someone falling downstairs in the dark. And inside, she finds the feast. But it is a grotesque one, a banquet of masks, roles she's worn for years. The martyr, the seductress, the victim, the misunderstood genius, the cold-hearted girl who never cries, the delicate woman who always does. Each mask is still warm, still glistening with the sweat of performance. She sees them all lined up like trophies, like corpses, and for the first time, she is repulsed, not at you, at herself, because she never wanted truth. She wanted mirrors, and now that there is no one left to reflect her, she sees the distortion. The manipulation wasn't evil, it was desperate. Her entire life has been a hunger to exist through others, through your gaze, your voice, your outrage, your love. She was never in love with you. She was in love with the reflection of herself in your devotion, and now, without it, she has to meet the part of her that never developed, the child that froze, the girl who decided long ago that her emotions were tools, not truths, that tears could build empires if timed correctly, that pain was power, not vulnerability, that love was a performance to trap men into confessing so she wouldn't have to feel. But you are not confessing, and that's why this hurts more than heartbreak. Because heartbreak would mean you loved her, and it ended, but you never entered the performance. And now she sees it. The feast turns rancid. She wanted to devour you, your attention, your energy, your identity, not to destroy, but to consume and feel whole. And you refused. Not out of vengeance, out of clarity. You didn't run. You didn't retaliate. You stayed long enough for her to see her own reflection clearly, and now she cannot look away. She begins to speak again, slowly, not to convince you, not to win, just to hear what her voice sounds like without an audience. And it's shaky, empty, honest. I don't know who I am, she finally says. You don't answer, because you were never here to answer. That's the one thing she could never understand. You were here to witness, not to define, not to carry, not to correct. And now she sees the hunger not as something caused by your distance, but as something that predated you entirely. Her manipulation wasn't conscious, it was instinct, a survival mechanism. And now that survival is no longer needed, she feels lost, not free. Because hunger doesn't vanish when the feast ends. It transforms, and she is beginning to feel the ache of a different hunger for something real, something beyond reaction, beyond validation. But that path doesn't begin with you. It begins in the ruins, in the silence, in the maskless moment where she admits she has never known how to love without control. You rise, not in anger, not in affection, simply because it is time. The conversation is not over, but it is complete. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to offer. You do not leave to prove a point. You leave because this moment has served its purpose. She doesn't stop you. That, more than anything, is the shift. No final scream, no threat, no plea. Just a quiet understanding that she cannot feast on your soul anymore, because you have reclaimed it. You have refused to become her mirror, and in doing so, you've left her with her own reflection. She may hate you for it, she may thank you for it, but neither matters, because her reaction is no longer your nourishment, and your silence has become her greatest teacher, not through wisdom, but through absence. You were the fire she tried to control, and now you are the void in which her shadows speak. A single mask lies on the floor. The eye holes are empty. The lips are painted into a scream that was never real. You don't pick it up. You never wore it. She stares at it for a moment longer as if it might blink. Somewhere in the distance, a mirror cracks not from pressure, but from stillness. You keep walking, not forward, not away, just without her orbit, and behind you, the silence breathes. Not cold, not cruel, just honest.